Now that we're up to speed on the different autofocus modes, let's check them out on a still life. We'll start with the 10D with its 7 autofocus points, then the 30D with its 9 autofocus points, the T2i like the 30D with 9 autofocus points, and finally the 7D with its different autofocus modes and 19 autofocus points. We'll be shooting a simple still life composed of different objects and at different spaces. We'll also use the same lens on all the cameras. We're going to use a 35mm f2.0 Canon EF lens. We're going to shoot at f2.0 and at ISO 800. And I'm just hand holding the cameras, keeping it in pretty much the same area. I shot handheld with the cameras instead of using a tripod. If I used a tripod, it would have been more precise, but 90% of the time out in the field, you're not going to be using a tripod, you're going to hand hold your camera. So let's start out with the 10D and its 7 autofocus points. We'll start with all of the autofocus points selected. The camera makes the focusing decision, and as you can see, it focused on the object that is closest to it, which is a fish. I rotated the quick dial to the left to select one of the left autofocus points, and it caught the camera. You can see the fish is slightly out of focus, so is the clock, and the bike in the back is really out of focus. I used the main dial to select the top autofocus point, and as you can see, the bike is in focus, especially the chain. All the other objects are slightly out of focus. So now let's move on to the 30D and its 9 autofocus points. We'll start again with all of the autofocus points selected, so we've got the fish and the clock pretty well in focus here. Even with just the addition of 2 autofocus points, more objects will be in focus. Here I selected one of the upper right autofocus points, and the bike is in focus. I selected a mid-left autofocus point, and here we have the camera in focus. The T2i has 9 autofocus points, and they're selected in the same fashion as on the 30D, so there's not really much difference. Here all of the autofocus points are selected, and the camera focused on the foreground object, the fish. Here I selected an upper left focus point, and the camera is clearly in focus. All of the other objects are slightly out of focus. One of the right autofocus points was selected, and the bike is in focus. Now we'll shoot with the 7D with its 19 autofocus points and selectable focus zones. Remember, we select the autofocus zones by pressing the MFN or manual function button on top of the camera. First, we'll start with all 19 autofocus points active and let the camera make the focusing decisions for us. As expected, the foreground object, the fish, is in very clear focus, but with the 19 autofocus points that the 7D supports, we also have the clock in pretty good focus too. Next we'll try zone autofocus. There's 5 different zones you can select. I twirled the dial around and selected the bottom zone, and the shot came out very similar to full autofocus. As you can see, the fish and the clock are in pretty good focus, almost the same as full autofocus. And by this time we should be very familiar with single point autofocus. Here I selected a middle left point, and the camera is in focus. So I suggest setting up a simple still life like this, or with a bunch of different objects, put them at different spacing, and practice with selectable autofocus points. The more you practice at this, the better you're going to get at it, and you'll really know how to use it out in the field when you're shooting for real.